My name is Terry McKinnell, and in this video I'm going to show you or explain to you the astronomy behind the astrological ages, such as the Age of Aquarius, Age of Pisces, and so on. If you're an astrologer, you're quite used to using planets and the sun and the moon. If you're a Western astrologer, you're going to be applying them into the tropical zodiac. You've got houses, you've got aspects. But the astrological ages involve a totally different system in astronomy. To start with, there are no planets or sun or moon involved. And even a lot of people may be rather confused about this, that the zodiac used in the astrological ages is not the tropical zodiac that Western astrologers use at all. It's a variation of a sidereal zodiac, a zodiac that is aligned to the constellations, not the seasons, such as spring and autumn and winter and summer. Basically, I'm going to talk about how the astronomy associated with the astrological ages that was developed around one age ago, around about 125 BC, and if you take our 2018 now and add that 125, it's getting very close to the length of an age, 2,150 years ago. And 2,150 years ago, there was a very intrepid astronomer and astrologer called Hipparchus. He was a Hellenistic Greek, and he set up the modern system that astrologers ever since have used to determine which age we are currently in. And what I'm going to be explaining in this video is that he made a fundamental mistake. And his fundamental mistake ensured that the astrological ages have only ever been a quirky side aspect of astrology. It's never been in the main field of astrology. If you go online and look for forecasts about what's occurring, it's going to be always involving planets and suns and moons and traditional horoscopes and mundane astrology. But apart from myself, very, very rarely does anyone ever come and explain what the future beholds because of the astrological ages. And that's because the model used for these astrological ages has been wrong for over 2,000 years. And if you use a wrong model, you don't get results. And obviously astrologers haven't got results from doing this, and that's why they're not used. But that can all change now, because what I'm going to be explaining in this video is how our intrepid astronomer and astrologer from over 2,000 years ago got it wrong. He didn't get it wrong intentionally. He didn't set out to confuse astrologers for an age. He was at the forefront of scientific and mathematical advances that the Hellenistic Greeks were engaged in, very, very similar to the scientific revolution that occurred in the last, starting about 500 years ago from now. Hipparchus, being a Hellenistic Greek, in many ways behaved just like modern people, or at least modern people up until recent times. The Hellenistic Greeks considered that they were superior to everyone else, and therefore everyone else was barbarians. And I think I've even remember seeing star maps, and there would be star maps called Spherica Grecian, which is the Greek star map, and then there's Spherica Barbarica, which is the barbarian star map. Now, the barbarians that they mainly refer to are the Babylonians. The Babylonians provided a starting point for the Hellenistic Greeks. But even the ancient Greeks still considered the Babylonians were barbarians because they weren't Greek. Though the Hellenistic Greeks absorbed and received and assimilated a lot of knowledge from the Babylonians, they still considered themselves superior. And so Hipparchus felt quite within the bounds of his rights to create a system as if whatever the barbarians had been doing beforehand didn't count. Hipparchus's main innovation that he brought to the astrological ages, which really did not exist before his time to anyone's knowledge, is the vernal point. Many astrologers may not be quite clear what a vernal point is. Now, a vernal point occurs every year, and in fact it marks the very beginning of Aries, or we should more correctly say it marks the very beginning of tropical Aries in the Western zodiac. And this occurs when the sun crosses the equator, passing from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere, usually on the 21st of March, so it could be a day or so either side. And at that time, on March the 21st, the sun is exactly above the equator, and the length of the night and day in the world is the same. The March equinox, which is often called the vernal equinox, the March equinox marks the beginning of Aries. The sun at this point is at 0 degrees Aries, and the whole 12-month or 12-sign cycle of the Western tropical signs begin. This was an incredibly important point, this 21st of March or thereabouts. And many ancient societies in Eurasia and in the Middle East derive their new year from this March equinox. Or sometimes they would use the other equinox, the September equinox. These two equinoxes provided very clear delineation for ancient societies for starting their years. And for example, our Easter in Western society, our Easter is derived from the Jewish Passover. And the traditional way of deciding when Easter occurs, or the most important day for Easter, is Easter Sunday. It is defined as the first Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal equinox. That's why Easter moves around all over the place, because even though the actual sun crossing the equator is always within a day or so of March the 21st, that full moon could be anywhere between 1 hour and 28 or 29 days later. So Easter is a very variable feast, but still just goes to show you that this is the system, or this is part of the methodology of ancient societies in working out their timing, which were always related to astrological and astronomical events. Now, Hipparchus, he did recognize the importance of this vernal point, this when the sun is at 0 degrees Aries around the 21st of March. He had been researching the position of stars from astronomers in the previous centuries. And what he discovered was that the stars were slowly moving compared to what the readings were for a few centuries before that. At this point, I'm going to have to do a small digression into a bit of astronomy, because when I stated that Hipparchus noticed the stars moving, this could be rather confusing to the average person, because to the average person, the stars are always moving. If you go outside at any night where you can see the stars, you will notice that they move relatively a long way in just a matter of 2 hours. And in fact, in about 2 hours, all the stars in the sky will move about 30 degrees, or the equivalent of one zodiacal sign. But when we say that Hipparchus noticed the stars are moving, he's not talking about the nightly movement of the stars that we all see. Now, if we want to understand about why the stars are moving, even why the stars move when we observe them at night, that is due to the first movement of the Earth. Now, the first movement of the Earth is that the Earth spins around its axis, taking 24 hours to do one cycle. And this is why when you go outside at night, you see the stars moving relatively rapidly, 30 degrees in every 2 hours. That's not the only movement of the stars, because if you go out on any particular night and look at the stars and say go out in 6 months' time and look at the night sky at about the same time, all the stars will be different, because now, 6 months later, you are looking at the other half of the universe. So this actually then breaks into the second movement of the Earth. And the second movement of the Earth is that while it's doing the first movement of spinning on its axis, it's also doing a circuit around the Sun, taking 1 year. So this 1 year annual movement of the Earth around the Sun creates a different perception of the stars moving, not as dramatic as the nightly move, but still over a course of a year it traverses 360 degrees through the whole sky. Now these two movements of the Earth, the first movement of the Earth spinning on its axis and the second movement going around the Sun, is taught to most people in school. What is not taught in school is the third movement of the Earth. And the third movement of the Earth is due to the fact that the Earth, while spinning, spins like a top. And when you would pull the string and the top would go out spinning, what did the top do apart from spin? It wobbled. The axis wobbled, doing a circuit. And the Earth does the same kind of wobble, except the wobble of the Earth's axis takes 26,000 years for one wobble or one circuit. So this is the cause of the movement that Hipparchus was talking about, because what it means is that if you went out tonight and looked at the stars, say at 9 o'clock tonight, and then you were able to time travel and come back in 13,000 years to the same location to the same time at night, when you look up, none of the stars would be the same, because you are now looking at the other half of the universe. And what this third movement of the Earth does, due to precession of the equinoxes, it slowly changes Earth's orientation to the stars at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. So it's a very, very slow movement. And it is not normally noticeable to anyone in their lifetime. But Hipparchus, being an intrepid astronomer, he had access to detailed observations of stars in previous centuries. And based on these previous observations, he noticed this movement of the stars. And so this is what creates the astrological ages. And the best way to visualize this is to think of two zodiacs surrounding the Earth. If you want to make it quite simple, think of each zodiac as a donut. So there's these two donuts. One donut is attached to the Earth's seasons, winter, summer, spring and autumn, via the two equinoxes and solstice points. So this zodiac depends upon 0 degrees tropical Aries beginning around March the 21st, and it's season orientated. Now, the second zodiac, which I'll call the sidereal zodiac, means it's not attached to the seasons, it's attached to the stars. And so the 12 zodiacal constellations can be transformed into 12 sidereal signs of exactly 30 degrees each. And this second zodiac is also around the Earth like another donut. Now, over the course of 26,000 years, from the perspective of one of these zodiacs, the other zodiac slowly shifts around in a large cycle of 26,000 years. And the established way, since the time of Hipparchus, to measure this move is to take 0 degrees tropical Aries. This is the zodiac based on the seasons, and this 0 degrees tropical Aries is represented by the Sun at the vernal equinox and is called the vernal point. So this vernal point is like an arrow, and this arrow always sits at 0 degrees tropical Aries, but slowly the sidereal zodiac, which is taking a 26,000 years circuit, this arrow slowly and surely traverses the whole of this second zodiac at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years and 1 sidereal sign approximately every 2,150 years. This is probably the easiest and best way to visualize the astronomy associated with precession of the equinoxes. And the term precession of the equinoxes relates to the fact that the equinoctial points, of which 0 degrees tropical Aries is one of them, does this slow movement backwards through the sidereal zodiac. But the sidereal zodiac that I am using is not the sidereal zodiac employed by Vedic or Indian astrologers. I also use the sidereal zodiac employed by the Vedic astrologers because I'm also a Vedic astrologer. But the sidereal zodiac I am using is offset, and I call it the helical sidereal zodiac. So Hipparchus decided that the position of the sun at the vernal equinox would determine which astrological age the world was in at any time. Now, I do remember actually reading many years ago, I think in the early 1990s when I was first researching the ages, that one astronomer or archaeoastronomer commented upon Hipparchus because Hipparchus is very famous for creating the first star catalogue. So therefore he was deciding, this is the stars that make up Aries, the constellation of Aries, this is the stars that make up the constellation of Pisces, and so on. And this research astronomer or research archaeoastronomer stated that he believed Hipparchus moved some of the stars between the constellation of Aries and the constellation of Pisces so that the age of Aries would end and the age of Pisces would begin in his lifetime, which just goes to show you that people always want to have an age start when they're alive. But this can only happen once every 2,150 odd years. Hipparchus seemed unaware of any earlier system of calibration, or if he was aware of it, perhaps he just thought that these were just the systems of barbarians who knew no better. The earlier systems were not mathematical, they were visual, and he probably just derided them as being non-scientific for his time. To give an example of this contradiction between visual astronomy and mathematical astronomy, let's examine the new moon. Every lunar month starts with a new moon when the moon comes around to the same longitude as the sun. In other words, they're conjunct. And when they're conjunct, which happens about every 28 or 29 days, that commences a new moon. However, this cannot be seen because when the sun and the moon are at the same position in the sky, you can't see the moon. And so it's not a visual astronomical method, it's a mathematical astronomical method. The ancient method, which also remains the method of the Islamic calendar and perhaps other calendars in the world, is that the new moon for their religious or civil purposes occurs when the first sliver of a new moon can be seen low in the western horizon every month. And this occurs a day or two after the exact mathematical new moon that occurs due to the conjunction of the sun and moon. So now we have this contradiction. We have two new moons. One new moon based on its visual appearance as a crescent in the sky, and the other one is the mathematical one. And the difference is going to be between 13 and 26 degrees for the position of the moon. So it's not a small difference. It's a rather large difference. Now, the Hellenistic Greeks, of which Hipparchus was part of, were at the forefront of a mathematical revolution. And so because they were at the forefront of a mathematical revolution, that is going to be Hipparchus's choice method of calibrating the astrological ages. Because Hipparchus could mathematically calculate the position of the sun at the vernal equinox, which is called the vernal point. He would know exactly whereabouts in which zodiacal constellation that this would occur at any time. Now, this is similar to calculating the Sun conjunct Moon as the exact start of the lunar month, as is the case in modern Western astrology. In the same way that there is two approaches or methods of determining the new moon, there is two methods to determining the shift of ages based on precession of the equinoxes. There is the mathematical version that Hipparchus developed, and there's the even older version based on visual astronomy. And the earlier visual astronomy method did not depend upon mathematical astronomy at all. In the ancient times, there was no mathematics, or there was no mathematics that they could apply to the situation. You just looked up in the sky to see what was there. Now, the ancient method of calibrating stars and zodiacal constellations is what is called the heliacal approach, or the heliacal method. Now, anything with the word heliacal in it involves the sun. The heliacal rising constellation is the zodiacal constellation that rises up over the eastern horizon before the light from the approaching sun makes the stars disappear. This occurs usually about 1 hour before dawn. If you've ever watched the approaching sun from the perspective of the night, you'll be outside, or if you've been in an aeroplane journey, which I've seen before, the sky is all dark and black and there's stars everywhere, and then all of a sudden a blue tinge comes to the eastern horizon, which quickly envelopes the whole eastern horizon and then goes up and then covers the whole sky. And this change from seeing stars against a black background to actually starting to seeing a blue sky occurs about 1 hour before dawn. This graphic here that I'm going to show you is demonstrating the vernal point on the 20th of March 2016 in Baghdad, in deference to the fact that this is the center of ancient Babylon. Here it is. Here I've got the sun sitting exactly on the eastern horizon. Now we're able to see the names of constellations such as Aquarius and Capricorns and whatever, because we have the software that can do that. But if you're sitting there on that day, at that time, all you would see is the sun and blue skies. You can't see anything else. Now, it's true that on that day, if you could see the constellations, the sun is sitting in the constellation of Pisces. And therefore, people would say, or from Hipparchus on, it would be stated that the world is in the Pisces age because the sun at the vernal point is located in the constellation of Pisces. The next graphic is the exact same location, the exact same date, but 1 hour before dawn. And here we're looking at the same eastern horizon, and there you can see the constellation of Aquarius just sitting above the eastern horizon, and then further above that, slightly to the right, is the constellation of Capricorn. In a few minutes after this, if we were to be there on that day, a few minutes after this, the constellation of Aquarius and most of the surrounding stars would quickly disappear as the blue light from the approaching sunrise would have corrupted the night sky. This is called the heliacal rising constellation. All night, these constellations have been rising. About 2 hours before this, the Capricorn constellation was rising. But now it's the Aquarius one. And if you look just above east, you can see the border outline of the constellation of Pisces, so it's not marked here, but you can't see any of the stars. And it also should be remembered that the ancients did not use constellational borders. Constellational borders turns the sky into some kind of cosmic real estate subdivision. And even today, astrologers use this real estate subdivision as demarking the point where the sun moves from one so-called constellation to another based on this real estate subdivision. But in ancient times, this had no meaning whatsoever. So what's important to understand is that in 2016 and in 2018, and for a long, long, long time to come, the constellation of Aquarius is going to be the last constellation that you will see rising above the eastern horizon, no matter where you live on the world, at the vernal equinox on the 21st of March. The difference between Hipparchus's vernal point method, where he takes the exact position of the sun within a zodiacal constellation, and the visible heliacal rising method, equals about 15 degrees, because on average a new degree rises up on the eastern horizon every 4 minutes, and so in 1 hour that is 15 degrees, or half a sign or half an age. And so that's the difference. That is the actual difference between the two methods, is half an age. But with an age being 2,150 years, it means it's almost 1,100 years difference depending upon which system you use. Now, the astronomy strongly suggests that the age of Aquarius arrived many centuries ago, provided the zodiacal constellations have a relationship to the astrological ages. Now, when I first started researching the astrological ages in 1987, I had no confidence in the zodiacal constellations because I just couldn't see how to rectify or rationalize that the age of Aquarius wasn't going to arrive until around about the year 2600, based on the method employed by Hipparchus, with just what I could see around me, which was that, there's a huge surge in the last few centuries towards democracy. There's planes flying everywhere. There's electricity everywhere. There's computers everywhere. There's electrical technology everywhere. I mean, these are all associated with Aquarius, and there was just no way I could reconcile what obviously appeared to be the age of Aquarius and with Hipparchus's system that said, no, the age of Aquarius can't arrive until 2600. So because I had this no confidence, I went back to rectification. And I actually worked out, independent of the astronomy, that the age of Aquarius arrived in the 15th century in 1987. And you can see that in my video, the rectification of the age of Aquarius. From the Renaissance onwards, around 500 years ago, scientists have been busy, or I should say modern scientists have been busy, discovering the empirical method, discovering how to do science correctly, and in the result, many claims of all the ancient scientists and doctors and whatever have been repudiated or replaced because they are no longer relevant. However, in the world of astrology, such stringency doesn't apply, and Hipparchus's approach to calibrating precession of the equinoxes has not been repudiated, and there's a very good reason for this, because very few astrologers actually research or study the astrological ages. I came across one astrologer, I think about 10 years ago, who claimed that he could only find 150 papers or books on or including or involving the astrological ages. And when you think of the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of astrologers, you can see that very few actually study the ages. And so Hipparchus has not been repudiated to date. What I am claiming is that his method of calibrating the astrological ages is incorrect. It is highly contentious in academia that anyone before Hipparchus had any knowledge of precession of the equinoxes, that he so-called discovered around 125 BC. However, there is a lot of evidence that astronomers before Hipparchus perceived the effects of precession of the equinoxes and wrote about them and used them in mythology. If you want to get information about archaeoastronomy and ancients' knowledge of precession of the equinoxes before Hipparchus, I would recommend you reading Hemlet's Mill by a couple of academics in the second half of the 20th century. It supplies an excellent example of showing how most of the ancient myths that came out of Greece and Babylon and all these places seem to be talking about the astrological ages. I was aware that my rectification of the arrival of the Age of Aquarius in the 15th century was over 1100 years too early compared to the modern method that was developed by Hipparchus. And it took me almost 20 years to discover the heliacal rising constellation because I do not have any academic background. So when I started first researching the astrological ages, I also had to research history and learn history, but I also had to kind of learn the scientific or the academic approach to studying subjects. And so it took me a long time to discover that the heliacal method of calibrating the rising constellation was a valid alternative approach to calibrating the astrological ages. Now, I'm not the only researcher that has discovered this point. I don't know how many others have, but I do know that at least one Austrian archaeoastronomer called Sepp Rothwangel wrote in Considerations about the Start of the Age of Aquarius, a paper he wrote that he compared different methods of calculating the arrival of the Age of Aquarius, and he considered the heliacal rising approach to be a valid approach as well. That is my presentation to you on the two approaches to calibrating the ages, and I would just like to say that as proof or to support my argument that the approach that Hipparchus took to calibrating the ages is incorrect is just by the fact that they're not used. I mean, if you were to study what people are talking about in history or predictions, they will not use the ages. They will use the outer planets, they'll use traditional mundane astrological techniques, but they will not use the ages because you cannot use a system that's wrong. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you have gained an appreciation of the issues surrounding astronomical calibration techniques applied to the astrological ages and why the system that has been employed by astrologers for the equivalent of the last age is in fact wrong. Thank you.